China, let us talk. How serious are you with defending your integrity and winning this global war? The US hegemony is based solely on one thing, on understanding that to run a global empire, you need to have friends that you bring up close to your level. Otherwise, you'll be the only rich man in a community of poor people, and that will bring you down. China and Russia have got that problem of being the of being the leaders of this new axis that is challenging the US hegemony. But their friends are despotic governments, weak governments, poor economies, and terrible living conditions in Africa, most specifically. Let's take a leaf from the US hegemony. After winning the Second World War, the allies of the United States were devastated by the war, and the United States came out of that war, emerged out of the war stronger because of the war economy, and seeing that her allies are weak, the United States came up with a Marshall Plan that empowered Europe and Japan. And over time, it extended to countries like South Korea and all these Western allied countries, which are predominantly white in complexion or anything closer to white. And the United States military decided, it's just a matter of decision, that all the countries that are black or closer towards blackness should be isolated from this global elite group of countries that have been purposed by the global superpower as the leaders of the world. And these black countries, they have been purposed to become the slave countries of the world. Hence, the politics in the black countries, most specifically in Africa, is poor and has got poor educational outcomes for the people of Africa who have become these victims of this US global hegemony. What I'm saying is that the US capitalism recognize that it will not be proper for USA alone to be successful. Hence, the Marshall Plan enabled German industrialization to succeed, and it led to the European Union. You know how the European Union came from the uh, trade relations between British and the Germans and the French, and it had become a bloc now. We have got NATO now, military alliance, and they have got alliances with the US, Britain, Australia, Japan, these white countries. You will see that there's a deliberate move of whiteness. There's a reason why I keep on saying whiteness, because I want to prove a certain point to you in this video. And because of that, the US hegemonic power has been preserved that way. Because trust me, even though the Nord Stream 2 bombing was bad for Europe, but they will just be unhappy about it, but they will do nothing about it because they still need the protection of the United States of America. And the US will keep on becoming stronger within that group of US, Europe, uh, Australia, Japan, South Korea, that usual group. Now, the rest of the world, this plan of the US, it works like this. You choose your few friends, the rest of the world becomes slaves. Iran becomes slaves. Iran, the Indians and the Saudi Arabians, for some reasons known by Allah, they were able to escape it. I truthfully do not know how the Saudi Arabians managed to have proper US relations, and they were helped with all that oil. They became rich and were allowed the US military. Perhaps it's because their skin color is not as black as ours. It's a little bit somewhere between close towards whiteness. But Iran and Saudi Arabia have got the same skin color, but Iran was not allowed to succeed. And Syria is not allowed to succeed. Afghanistan not allowed to succeed. Basically, the rest of the Middle East. Perhaps what was feared in Saudi Arabia was Allah, because the most holy country as far as most religions are concerned. Now, anyway, the point I want to bring out is that China, if China wants to emerge as this global superpower that wants to challenge Washington hegemony, it has to ensure that its friends also go up to its level. China needs a certain Marshall Plan or something similar to a Marshall Plan. What China currently has is a policy of non-interference in other countries, meaning that countries can be led by dictators with poor living, with poor outcomes as far as living conditions of its populations are concerned, because China will say we're not interfering. But that, at the end of the day, it leads to a world led by China, where China is the only country that is successful and doing well and are surrounded by allies who are weak and miserable. And that will not aid it in becoming this opposing uh, uh, opposing side against Washington. So my suggestion is that China should do what America did, a Marshall Plan. Okay, a Marshall Plan into Africa, just what America did to the Europeans. If China does that to Africa, beginning to demand good governance in Africa, I'm not talking about other parts of the world. The world is very huge. There's a lot of troubles. Just talking about my people. That's what I'm concerned about. Africa. If something similar to a Marshall Plan led by the Chinese is hatched in Africa, Africa's development agenda will leapfrog, and China's quest for global superpower will become much better. Because as we can see, Washington clearly is not interested in helping Africa to improve economically. On the contrary, Washington is heavily invested in the subjugation of black people who happen to stay in Africa that has got resources. So it's not part of their interest, okay, to see black people rise, because they have already allocated, after the Second World War, black countries to become slave countries. Okay. And they chose it deliberately. Okay. They just, some white dudes sat down and said, we hate black folks. Let's just make them slaves. Let's make sure that in their countries there's no democracy that will work. As we can see, in our region, the only country where democracy seems to be working to some good extent is South Africa. The only reason is because there's white people who stay in South Africa. Take all the white people out of South Africa, this country will be allowed to disintegrate into nothingness. It will be a banana republic as well. Because those that are powerful enough to effect a change clearly do not want, or they clearly demonstrate a desire to keep our countries enslaved through giving us terrible governments. So for China, who is fighting against the United States, not me, China. If I am Xi Jinping right now, I will be opening my checkbook to Africa. Not only that, and I will be coming to my intelligence and my military guys to figure out a way of making sure that push comes to shove, African governments must perform, or else the vamoose will create a hegemony that is based on countries that perform well. Failure to that, China will not be able to counter the US aggression against the rise of China. As Africans, it's not our job or duty to fight the war for the Chinese or fight the war for the Americans. We are spectators in their war. At the same time, we are participants in the sense that we are the ones that are being used for whatever purpose they plan. As I said, the American empire has purpose that Black Africa should be the supplier of slaves for these slavery jobs, low wage earning jobs. You will never start a Google if you're a black man. You can never rival Google because they look at you are black, you're from Zimbabwe. They will crush you through various ways. First of all, they crush you by giving you a government led by a despot like Idi Mnangagwa, who has got no intention whatsoever of blessing his country, who doesn't even know how, let alone want to. Because even if Idi Mnangagwa wakes up tomorrow and wants to build Zimbabwe, he actually doesn't know where to start. And the US military is happy with a man like that in power. Hence, I'm suggesting if Xi Jinping is serious about taking over the world, you need Mr. Xi Jinping to rethink your strategy. How beneficial is Idi Mnangagwa to the Chinese attempt of running the world? Zero. He might look beneficial now because if the Chinese are not wise, they might think just like the Washington Fox. They might think, oh well, Africa is a slavery country, so let's just do what the Americans are doing. But that is losing an opportunity because the opportunity would have been the ability to tap on the weaknesses of Washington in Africa, and that will make China great and China powerful. If you've got powerful friends who are providing a market. Africa has got 1.4 billion people. That is a huge market that will help empower the problems of the overcapacitated Chinese companies. Let's take a look at the construction industry in China. There are companies like what's the name of that Chinese company that is building Evergrande? Chinese property developer Evergrande overcapacitated in China. Chinese railway builders, uh, Chinese electricity generators or yeah, electrical companies, they are overcapacitated in China. We have got a heavily underdeveloped Africa with 1.4 billion citizens who are an opportunity to develop into a market. And if China secures its relationships with good functional governments in Africa, then Chinese firm can obviously win in Africa over the arrogant, hate-blaking American firms. We can defeat Wall Street, China. I've been trying to beg the Americans for over 1.5 years, but they are still not coming into the table. Perhaps China will see the light and see the opportunity in Africa. 1.4 billion. The American economy at some point will go down because they have overprinted the US dollars. They are not producing anything. They are running a casino economy using the US Federal Reserve to inflate the Dow Jones and the S&P to create a feeling of more wealth being generated. Yet there is no wealth being generated. They are just changing the values of Nvidia, of Tesla, of Apple and Google. Nothing materially changed in the past 2 years in Google to warrant that rise in the big seven tech companies that are powering the S&P and the Dow Jones. It's simple financial engineering. There is no underlying development in it. At some point, judgment will have to come to the American economy. Excessive money printed without much real assets, meaning high inflation for the Americans and a terrible disaster for the whole bloc of the Americans and the Europeans. You don't need to you don't need a bullet. This is a self-inflicted pain that they have actually posed on themselves. And by that time, when that pain comes to the Americans and the Europeans, they will not even have the capacity or the power or the intelligence to even compete in Africa. They will desert Africa when they're trying to build to rebuild their own hegemony that would have fallen through their own self-inflicted pain. And China has got an opportunity here to pick up the slack of the US strategies in Africa. Make no mistake, the US military's presence in Africa is very strong, but it is not for the purposes of building Africa or protecting Africa, rather for the purposes of protecting the interests of the white capitalists, American capitalists, who believe that black people should be subdued for the purposes of slavery jobs that have been allocated to us as black people. The US AFRICOM is here while Mnangagwa is destroying Zimbabwe. They've got a military base in Zambia while Mnangagwa is destroying Zimbabweans. Perhaps they actually wanted Mnangagwa to be destroying the Zimbabweans. So to counter that, China needs to look at us, Africans, from a different perspective. And once China begins to understand that, that is when they can actually become a global superpower. Perhaps there is another king somewhere in the Arabs who might see that light. Instead of Saudi Arabia spending too much money investing in the line, they might or spending too much money buying expensive soccer stars, they might use it to invest in rebuilding Africa. And Saudi Arabia could be a leader in this emerging multipolar world, because the Arabians, and by extension the GCC, already have a geopolitical foothold in the North African Arab nations. And they also need to overcome their fears of black skin and begin to understand that they too need to develop their own kind of Marshall Plan. With all the money that have come from Saudi Aramco, the sale of oil, it will be best used to increase their presence in Africa through uplifting Africa. If no one else does that, who knows? Perhaps the Japanese can see the light and do the same. The Japanese economy has been suffering because of racism. I think the Japanese now know that it's because of their closed nature. That is why they have got problems with their own demographics. They might need to align more with the black Africa. I do not know why all these white countries have got a fear of a black skin. Or, better still, if us Africans take the bull by its horns and rebuild without the Americans, without the Europeans, without the Chinese, without the Arabs, without the Japanese, even without the Indians, who also could be an emerging power. My problem I have also is these racist white people in Cape Town still cannot see the light even them, the opportunity that is in front of so-called white monopoly capital in South Africa, they've got a great opportunity to become the leaders of this African renaissance that I am alluding to. But they are so stuck and busy in sponsoring things like Operation Dudula and destroying Black lives because they are so short-sighted. They're thinking about now. They're thinking about you crushing Julius Malema and making sure that Black people stay in poverty instead of actually raising the living conditions of Black South Africa so that Black South Africa could provide that human capital to be used in the rest of Africa. You see, if everything fails, all these other countries fail, white monopoly capital in South Africa has got that opportunity. But I don't see them seeing that light. They're still struggling also with racism. You see, racism works against the one who's a racist at the end of the day because it makes you get blocked from the opportunities that are in front of you, but because the opportunities come from people who are black whom you don't like, then you lose that opportunity because you are failing to overcome your senseless, baseless fears of a black color instead of partnering with Black Africa. You see, in South Africa, the white monopoly capitals, the first batch that came into Africa was the people from the Netherlands, the Boers or Boers. Then the English. They had their own Anglo-Boer war. But afterwards, they made peace, they got united, and they were able to move forward. But they were not able to to move beyond color lines. But over time, they have learned to love people with a little bit of blackness. They are still adding white colors. They add a bit of Muslims, a bit of Indians. Perhaps given time, they will too add black people. It's at some point they will come to a realization that they are just alone in Africa. When Britain and American whites are having their own economic troubles, they're not becoming to rescue white people in Cape Town. White people in South Africa need to invest in good relations with Black Africa. Not for the purposes of countering the rising of Black Africans, but for the purposes of actually partnering and becoming the pioneers who will benefit from African renaissance. But they too, preaching to them is like speaking to a wall. They don't listen. They don't listen. Which leaves black people alone. Which is the most powerful black group in Africa? In South Africa, it's the ANC, the emerging black upper middle class and the black elite in South Africa. They do also have an opportunity to industrialize not only in South Africa but in the rest of Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa has an opportunity in stabilizing Zimbabwe and making sure that South African firms benefit from a stable Zimbabwe and grow the South African hegemony into the rest of Africa, South African leadership in growing Africa. And that leadership has to be based also on that Marshall Plan kind of that I was talking about. That you have to bring your partners close to where you are, not to crush them. Once you crush them, you'll be the only rich guy in the neighborhood and nobody will come protect you when there is an invasion or some kind of attack. Look, when South Africa's got a problem with the ESCOM, where are they buying power from? When Zimbabwe is also struggling with its own electricity, Mozambique is struggling, Zambia is struggling. Who has been stopping the development of power generation in the Inga Dam project in the DRC? Isn't the Inga Dam project an opportunity for the region to generate enough electricity for itself? But here am I looking at these people, these powers, and seeing all of their fears that all are geared towards crushing people like me. I've seen that within this whole pyramid, people like me, black men from countries like Zimbabwe, specifically, I mean, it's worse still if you're not just as black Zimbabwean, but if you're a Ndebele, black Zimbabwean, you are really at the bottom of the bottom. And therefore, nobody is willing to, or nobody is incentivized as far as they're concerned to bring you up to their level, because they think that you have been designated a certain position to be the slave. Slaves in Zimbabwe are so happy when they start getting jobs in the UK, USA. Don't get me wrong, I don't undermine those things. Coming from that low base, we get to be grateful. But if you are analyzing from where this position that I'm taking you out, zooming out, and beginning to see the bigger picture, you will begin to see that we actually have resigned to this slavery mentality, this slavery jobs, slavery mindset, such that we celebrate being a housing yicker, if you know what I mean. We celebrate being promoted to be the one who drives the car for the master, because we have resigned to a place where we cannot envision ourselves as the owners of the farm. Land invasions happened in Zimbabwe in the late 1990s, and black people get an opportunity to self-determination. Unfortunately, our own, very own government systems, notwithstanding the influence of the British, the Americans, or whoever, our own governance systems as black people failed us, because we're still struggling from the internal problems of being born poor. And tragically, if you're born poor and predisposed to poverty mentality, you tend to be aggressive against the next person, because you do not know when the next meal is going to come. Therefore, you find corruption is rife, as opposed to those that grew up in rich countries who are exposed to wealth. They don't feel that if they don't make money today, they don't feel like there'll be no money tomorrow. They know that there might be money tomorrow as well. And so they tend to build good governance systems for themselves, which now puts the ball on the court of the black African. Instead of playing this geopolitical football of pitting the West against China for the purposes of extracting support from them because of their own wars so that we can be uplifted, perhaps we really do need to confront our own demons as black people and realize that the land invasions in Zimbabwe could have brought about an economic emancipation for our own people, but we ourselves are to blame because we are the demons against our own selves. We perhaps need to lift ourselves out of poverty through changing these limiting belief systems about what we can actually become, what we can do, who we are. We would command respect if we were to respect ourselves. We will command respect if we were to build ourselves without having to rely on others. Others will come along the way when they see the opportunity of partnering with us. Not China partnering with us as a measure of countering Washington, or Washington partnering with us as a measure of countering Chinese growth. Because once either of the two finally get to a position where they are comfortable without us, they will dump us, because there will be no reason to carry on investing in Africa when there is no strategic need for it. So Africa must invest in Africa. Black people must invest in black people. Tribalism must end in Africa. Useless things like Operation Tutula must be understood that it is a fight between black cultures fighting for slavery jobs and not for true victory. We need to demonstrate as poor Africans, as first of all, let's stop using the word poor Africans. Let me say, as a rich, powerful, well-oiled, united, wise Africans. The ball is in our court. The powerhouses of Nigeria, Rwanda, Congo, Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, Morocco, Tanzania, Botswana, Namibia, Angola with oil, the gas from Uganda. What can stop us from industrializing from within? Except for our own selves, except for our own demons. I have noticed that much of the lack of progress of black people is their own demons. Never mind white people, black people themselves. Jealousy amongst our people. Those demons need to be overcome. The desire to be better than the other, to stay on top than the other, even though you are a 2 out of 10. Not allowing anybody to be a 3 out of 10 because you are a 2. You must be the 1 out of them. I see you. I'm a 2 out of 10. You, all of you must be 1 out of 10 or 0 out of 10 because I'm a 2 out of 10. That debilitating mindset is causing untold suffering in Africa. And the carelessness, not caring about the other suffering Africans, not caring at all, just caring about myself, me. Selfish ambitions that we black people carry. So it's important for me to address these things, because if indeed we really truly want to succeed as black people, we need to address that. Look at yourself in the mirror and begin to see the ugly parts of yourself. Address them. Once you have addressed them, it is much easier now to address the problems that other people out there are bringing towards you. And once you address your weaknesses and become strong, people will be more affiliated or be attracted to you, because of they will see the work that you've been doing within your own life. So it makes me think that African growth is not going to be pioneered by the Americans or the Chinese, and it shouldn't be anyway. It should be pioneered by the Africans. As I'm speaking to you, if you are an African, what emotions do I invoke in you? Just be honest with yourself. Do you feel like, who is this man speaking to us? Who does he think he is? I am better than him. Or I think I'm better than him. Or he wants to be better than me. So let me try figure out ways of how to crush him so that I'll become better than him. Are your intentions towards attracting our oppressors, impressing our oppressors, or you truly understand the shared problem that we have as Black Africans, and you are willing to uplift anybody who is geared towards fighting the African cause, or you use the African cause as a means of self-enrichment, even if it means prolonging the suffering of your fellow Africans. Just be honest with yourself. You don't need to answer to anybody, just answer to yourself. As a Black African listening to me right now, if you begin to solve issues from that position and begin to free ourselves from the mental slavery that we've put ourselves in, we will leapfrog into a strong and united Africa. We'll be able to build a continent that our posterity will be proud of. My name is Nqobani Zondo. I am hoping that we Africans can be led by the Lord God Almighty to transform our living conditions. Enough is enough. Jesus is not a white man. You were made in his image. So let's start by that spiritual cleansing that leads to a change of perspectives and mindsets that will develop into agendas that make sense, that bring value to this generation and the generations to come. If you are with me, say amen and share this video with those whom you believe are like-minded. Have a great evening.